Hey everybody, welcome back to another exhilarating episode of Energy Bites here with myself, John Calfan, my wonderful co-host Bobby Nealon. How you doing today, Bobby? And the founder and managing partner of Velocity Insight Singular,
just one insight.
Zack Warren. They only promise one insight,
one good point,
minimum one insight. I like it. How you doing today, Zach?
I'm really good. I live in Denver, so 3 days in Houston has resaturated my
you
my
look
skin. Right.
You look vibrant. I mean,
yeah, right.
Well, you got basically every type of weather you could get while you're here. Just like every Houstonian every week.
Landed in a thunderstorm, and now it's beautiful outside.
Yeah,
so it's pretty good.
No, you picked a really good time. I took my kid to the park for the first time in a few months yesterday because it was actually, it didn't get above 85 degrees or whatever it was.
I'm like wearing a sweater and I'm comfortable.
Yeah. This would not have been the same situation last week.
No.
I'm incredibly thankful for our rain and now the moderately cooler temperature. Everyone in Houston's like freaking out. We're in like long sleeves and stuff because that's how it works down here. The minute it starts to cool
we walked out of the donut shop with my daughter earlier. She's like, it's kind of cold. I was like, it's not cold. It's like 75 degrees outside.
Colin's wore sweatshirts.
It's not bad.
Today. like well, it's not that cold. Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for kind of arranging your schedule and everything so we could get you on while we're here. But kind of, let's jump into it. Kind of tell us your background, kind of how you got into energy and tech and to where you are today.
Yeah. So I'm a reservoir engineer by background. Was a mechanical engineer at UT and then started at ExxonMobil in 2003. Was there for about 5 years. I worked mostly international assets, worked in their research lab for a couple of years, and then standard Exxon resume. I went to work for Netherland Sewell, did third-party reserves for a few years there. And then along the way, my wife and I moved up to Denver and worked for a series of smaller operators up there. 2015, I got to Great Western Petroleum and was the reservoir manager and was basically bitching about our data a lot, that our data quality and integration and stuff like that wasn't where it should be, and ended up running a data analytics team for a couple of years and was like, oh man, this is really fun. I really love being a reservoir engineer. I miss it sometimes, but it was like a whole new set of problems I'd never needed to wrestle with before. And so ran that team for 2 years, made basically all of the mistakes that you could make running a data analytics team for the first time. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, right. And
no one in the oil field has any idea what you're talking about.
Right. Don't try to connect directly to Bolo. That doesn't work. That's a mistake.
Isn't that a bizarre database behind it?
It's unit data. It's this 3-dimensional database structure. Don't do that. And kind of saw like, hey, we would have been a lot more efficient if we could have just hired a consulting firm. So I founded Velocity Insight in 2021, and we're basically a data analytics team for hire. So kind of like the team you might see at a large E&P, but we work for mostly smaller companies, a lot of private equity portcos, family companies, doing hands-on projects. We also do advisory, like software selection and strategy work, teach Power BI classes, that kind of thing. So we're up to 12 or 13 people, 28 clients, something like that.
Nice.
So yeah, it's like a real company.
Yeah. 2 years and there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. We like pay taxes and stuff like that.
It's official.
That's when it's official. When you're
note to the IRS, we are not cheating on our taxes.
Well, so how did you, how'd you get into the kind of tech side of things coming from the energy background, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think reservoir engineers on average are among the nerdiest disciplines.
I think the geologists would argue with you.
I'll
colored pencils,
I'll agree a little bit, but
it's different.
My experience, like the engineers, like engineers always want to solve problems.
Yeah, we like to solve those problems, man.
Yeah, and within reservoir engineers, like I worked at the research lab.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Nerd of there.
Nerd alert.
Yeah.
Right. And early in my career, I was doing a lot of full field reservoir simulation. Exxon had a series of in-house reservoir simulators that they had built and for an ungodly amount of money.
Yeah.
Just like all the other super
yeah, we had Mars and Empower and all these tools that they used forever. And we did all the post-processing in SaaS.
Okay.
So my first
Run
real
SaaS,
exposure.
run.
What's that?
Run SaaS, run, right?
Right. So I spent years programming SaaS scripts to do post-processing and analysis on reservoir simulation models, which I enjoyed. I knew that I didn't want to do it forever, but did a lot of that. And then by the time I got to Samson Resources in 2010, Spotfire was really starting to catch on. They had that whole Core Lab partnership, which is like the best marketing story for E&P software thing ever. You guys know that story?
No, let's dive into it.
Yeah. So the old, not old, they're still around. Core Labs consortia for core data in the different shale basins. You'd pay like $100,000. You committed to collect 2 whole cores from vertical wells, submit them to Core Lab. They do all the analysis, and then they'd compile it from like 20 operators, 30 operators. And the way they delivered the data back to you was in a DXP, a Spotfire DXP.
Nice.
But you got a free license as a participant in the consortium. You got 2 free consumer licenses, so you could open the DXP that they had sent you, but you could not add any new data.
Okay.
So like everybody else, I was a reservoir engineer at Samson.
Well, I want to put myself
right, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so much better than Excel. It's so much better than SAS. Oh, it looks like there's an import feature. You hit that button, you get a splash screen. If you would like to import new features, please call Tibco at 1-800. And I mean, it was genius. It worked so well. I don't know what salesperson is responsible for that deal, but it was brilliant. You know,
who was part of that? I mean, it wasn't even Tim Lozer. Was he part of that early on?
I asked Funk, and I've asked a couple of other people, like, who is the one who got that deal done? And I still don't know.
I don't know about the deal, but because Tim was at Tibco, right?
Times.
And then
I think so. Yeah.
And
then, but anyway, I did a bunch of
It's always
Spotfire
interesting
work.
to understand how they became the preferred,
Well, and then it was self-reinforcing, right? Like you get a client and they'd say, man, I really need to import shapefiles. And so they'd figure out how to import shapefiles. Oh man, I really need to do box and whisker plots, which is like my favorite visualization, right? And box and whisker plots are a default option in Spotfire, which almost no other visualization package handles, but it's a great method for that kind of data.
For sure.
So anyway, did a lot of Spotfire work at a number of different companies. First got introduced to Power BI in 2019, and kind of started falling in love with it. And then just market dynamics wise, I think that Microsoft is going to do what they always do.
Yeah. Just give it time and they'll
network effect. And
right. I mean, there's Teams integration, there's PowerPoint integration, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And
I actually just did my Windows update last night, and now they've got a Copilot button on the start menu now that pulls up a sidebar.
Yeah, that whole if they can pull off that whole fabric thing across the board and the Copilot with it, it's gonna be pretty wild.
Yeah, there's some really interesting things, and it's like it's not about a technology question. It's so much more to me about a commercialization question and a market, imprint and
when it's so sticky.
It's so sticky.
Once you start using that and you find some really good workflows with it, it's so hard to get out of it. I was using this yesterday. I've been trying to play around with this chat dev Git repo that has come out, which is supposed to be like a software team of agents. You set it up, you put in your open API key, you tell it, build me this software, and then it goes through each agent is a department basically that will do QA, all this stuff. So I was trying to get that set up, and I was using another one that's called Open Interpreter, which is basically a LLM for coding, but that has access to the internet. And I was using one AI to go and set up this other app. Like, this is nuts, man. Like,
this is turtles all the way down.
This is full Matrix right here. But it's I don't think people give Microsoft enough credit, especially for the enterprise stuff, right? Just like being able to go. Not only have they sustained for so long, but they continue acquiring and then integrating, and then most importantly, having a very good feedback loop of progressing, right? Because like I remember when I first started messing around with Power BI, when Bobby and I were working together,
probably.
Yeah. And I was like, because I'd come from Spot, I'd been using Spotfire as a
very mature by 2018.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course we were using it for like 1 second data, which Power BI does
high resolution. And
I'll disagree with you. We can talk about that later.
Then.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to have to set up a custom. I don't even think at that point they had Python or R in it yet. So there was
early.
Like no, there was no customization around it. But it's a great product now, in my opinion, right? Like there's a lot of really good things about it that I like that I don't think many of the other Viz tools have, honestly.
One from y'all's side too. I mean, there's not a even small but even major EMP that's not using the Microsoft stack that doesn't have Office 365. So I mean, like, and you're going to get much less pushback from IT
departments.
If you're using the Microsoft stack. Like if you come in and say, "Hey, I've got this cool thing. I need you to deploy a container on a Linux VM," they're gonna their head's gonna explode.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's painful, and like I love Spotfire. I still love it. We do some work on top of Spotfire, but I'm interested in not just like where the ball is today, but where it's going. And I think you look at the way all that stacks up. Like a lot of EMP companies now are on E5 licenses, which means that Power BI Pro is free. Mm-hmm. Like there is no incremental cost for the equivalent to Spotfire Analyst at $1,200 a year, right?
Yep.
Like,
I'm going through my Spotfire renewal right now, and I'm like, I can see why people,
right? And I mean that $1,200 for an employee that makes $200,000 is not that big of a deal, but like,
no, but it's something.
No, that's
I mean, whatever it ends up being for the size of your company, $70,000 to 100 or whatever. I mean, like that's potentially someone's salary. I mean,
right.
No,
that's it's funny because I remember when we first got our Spotfire licenses. When we were working together, I was like, "Oh, it's only $1,200 a year. That's not bad." Now it's like I will never I'll use Power BI until
unless you really need it,
right? Unless I just have to have a Spotfire license. But even then, I'll probably ask someone else to do it for me.
Yeah. So we run this big software survey to try to look at market share, and the majority of E&P companies in our data set have both Spotfire and Power BI, and I think that's the right choice for most companies. You've got like a reservoir engineer, a geologist, a production engineer, whatever, who's built a lot of cool stuff. They're really productive in it.
Right.
Keep them happy. Yeah. Do not screw with that. You're trying to add new things. You're trying to deploy stuff on a smartphone app. Then go dual track.
No, it's just you need to teach them how to create star schemas, Zach, and
oh my god,
how to do it in Power BI. Like
we have a training module for that. And it's painful. Yeah, I mean it's
no. I mean like that's what we are. I mean again, and to your kind of the point you talked about, we're subsurface and engineering as Spotfire, and then but like the accounting, we've got a couple like again to the other point, we actually have a couple star schemas and cubes for the accounting data, and they love it. And like they fly around in it, and
it's really good.
So I mean,
it's really good.
You gotta. I think we talk about this a good bit, but you got to meet people where they're at.
I think that's that's been one of the I would say a very surprising kind of thread from almost all of our guests is it's like from a user experience perspective, it's always easier to meet them in the tool that they understand the most and they use on a day. Like no retraining, no new training, no friction from the IT department, no friction on, well, I don't know how to use this thing. Like, and I genuinely think it makes sense, even though.
But set up processes behind that or upstream of that make make their
great data
stuff more
warehouse.
Reproducible and better. Yeah.
Dude, a good job on the data engineering and data management side. Then I can push the same exact set of tables to whatever platform you want to go into.
And then again, talk about the Power Platform, and you got a Power BI data set, and now you can connect seamlessly to that and from your Excel dashboard.
Seriously.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I think that's
a lot of cool
one,
stuff,
right? Like Bobby knows how much I've hated Excel historically, primarily because on the field side, that's typically, or on the ops side, that's typically where data goes to die because it's being sent via emails and it ends up in a My Docs folder and then no one ever sees it again, right?
Flowback reports are the worst thing to deal with in the entire industry.
Frac stages are the same thing. But having the ability to, have a proper data structure and pipeline and then feed that in a structured, pseudo locked down way to an Excel spreadsheet.
Well, and to get things like
Go
row
ahead.
level security to
Right,
go all the way
right.
downstream.
Yeah.
Like IT departments worry about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, being able to mask social security numbers and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So you've got some privacy protections. Those features really matter. And if you've got a grown up data engineer who can really do that the right way, then whatever destination they end up in, it's going to work.
Yeah.
I write these really nerdy blog posts, and one of them is implementation matters more than selection.
Mhm.
Selecting a slightly better piece of software is probably not going to get you anywhere if you do a shitty job of implementing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You could have a Mercedes that you put bald tires and 87 octane gas in it, and you're not going to be very happy with the performance. So
Yeah.
It's always that people, processes, and technology piece. And
Oh,
people
100%.
always think that, I get this tool, my life's gonna be so much better. It's like, no, or it's the other way around. Like we were talking about this the other day because we saw, a really cool tool kind of on the ESG side, and it's like, all this is going to do is force us to get our data in order on this side, and that's 90% of the work. So why don't we just focus on doing that, and then we'll decide if we want to use them or not, or at that point we can probably do enough of what we need to do, like in Spotfire, Power BI, or whatever,
possibly.
But I mean, I went through it. University Lands, we did a MDM project. Yeah, no, I know, but basically just procuring and setting it up. We're like, if we would have just forced ourselves to do this, we basically did the work just by it forced us to communicate and to come up with these rules, or whatever. But then like the software may have made it a little bit easier, but it was, again, 90% of the work was just actually getting us to collaborate.
Time in conference rooms.
Yeah.
I've been in part of 2 MDM implementations, and like they're painful, they're hard. They can result in really, really good outcomes.
Yeah.
But the simplest thing of just like, hey, here's a list of all the wells that are in Aries but not in Bolo, and here's a list of the wells that are in Bolo but not in Aries. Like let's fix that.
What operator do you have in this system, and what operator do you have for non-op?
Not even getting. I'm just talking about the list of wells.
Which wells?
Just like, that those kinds of things are really, really valuable. They're slow. You got to take the time to do them. But if you've done a good job of that kind of stuff, then downstream, you're just going to see efficiency and efficiency and efficiency.
Because people trust what they're getting. And,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, like to your point, you're getting it from the same source. So let's back up a little bit, because you brought up your software survey, and let's kind of dive into that a little bit. And kind of explain that, for people who aren't aware, and then maybe if you want to hit on some of the trends you saw this past year.
Yeah. So this all came out of me being curious as to like who uses what and why.
Yeah.
Stepping into a data analytics role, I thought the world revolved around Aries, right?
Yeah.
Because that was my
Reservoir
background. Reservoir engineer, right? Like that's the way you think. And spending more time thinking multidisciplinary, you start to really understand how important accounting systems are. You start to really understand what the role of a well lifecycle system, like a well view or an open wells or a well ease or whatever. You start to see how those different things matter, and like, okay, well, I think I understand who uses Aries and who uses PhDWin and now Combo Curve and all these others, but I don't know anything about these others. So very early in our development was the idea of, well, why don't we just ask? Like, let's build a database. So we just published our second one a couple of weeks ago, 160 participants. We look at 10 different categories of E&P software and try to figure out who's using what, kind of slice it by public versus private, micro cap, small cap, mid cap, large cap, a little bit of regional trends. Like P2 had a really effective sales force in Denver.
Okay.
And so Bolo and Excalibur have strong market share in Denver. And then you go to Midland and nobody's even heard of those tools. They're all using like Integra and Inertia because the salespeople for Integra and Inertia physically lived in Midland.
Okay, yeah,
right?
Which is a big deal in Midland.
It's a huge deal, right?
You got to be.
I think it's true everywhere. Like people in Tulsa want to talk to somebody in Tulsa, and people in Bakersfield want to talk to somebody in Bakersfield. And so you see like regionalism, you see this weird compartmentalization where certain tools will get used by all of the large companies and none of the small companies.
Yeah.
Like huge divisions there.
Such as
SAP.
Oh, SAP. I mean, SAP is the classic example, right? And,
it's like Ariba, SAP.
Uh-huh.
Probably a lot of the accounting.
Yeah, a lot of the accounting
ERP,
definitely goes that way. Like enterprise asset management tools get used by super majors and almost no one else, which is like enterprise asset management is useful.
Yeah. Can you dive into like examples of that for people.
So an EAM system would help you keep track of maintenance and material transfers. So like if I've got a compressor on pad number 1 and I'm going to move it over to pad number 2, that touches the operations group. It touches accounting because they have to like do debits and credits between the owners of all of those.
Sure.
So an EAM is going to handle a lot of that kind of material for you.
Yeah.
But you see it implemented at big companies and you simply don't see it at small companies. Open Wells still has a pretty good presence among large companies, and almost no small companies use it anymore.
Use it?
Do you?
Well, we inherited it from Equinor, so that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, like it was the easiest. It was
and if you have a well-built implementation of Open Wells, why would you change?
Yeah.
Right. The cost to switch to another system would probably be.
Yeah. No, Equinor did a good job, and it was
$1
easy to. Yeah, it was really easy to, slide over.
Keep it going.
And,
Right.
What are you seeing those small caps use, or the independents?
For which category? Right.
Wells. Let's just
Wells. Yeah. So like Wellview is the 800-pound gorilla, right? Like their market share is by far and away the biggest in North America. Open Wells and Lois. Have you heard of Lois?
I've
It's
not
a
heard of Lois.
Weatherford tool.
Okay.
That I can't find on their website anymore, but there's still people who use Lois a little bit. And then there's this just like wave of smaller ones. So Wellies is probably next in line. That's now a Quorum product.
Okay.
Then there's like Petrosite and Rig Reports, which just won the thing, and Point Flow, Jeff Hughes and those guys. There's sort of this like whole group of people who've gone, ooh, Wellview looks like a tasty target.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, it's expensive. I mean, there's no two way. And then, do people really need that?
But you want to talk about a Mercedes?
Oh, yeah.
If you've got Open Wells or Wellview or any of those that are really fully implemented, man, you can do some amazing things in terms of cost tracking and like, drilling optimization, completion optimization. If you've really got your hands on that data, the world's your oyster, right?
Yeah,
so
100%.
many cool things.
What kind of categories do y'all kind of break those down into as far as the software side of things?
Yeah. So we have a framework, of course. The big 6 is accounting, reserves and planning, production allocation, which people do not talk about enough, in my opinion. So important. Daily well life cycle, land and lease, and then SCADA.
Okay.
Those are the big 6. And then this year we added BI tools, GIS, data subscriptions, which was fascinating, and rig scheduling tools.
How was the data subscription? I'm very curious.
I kind of knew this, but I am horrified by the number of people who have both S&P Interdeck and Inveris Prism.
Yeah. And I'll tell you why, it's Kingdom.
It's Kingdom and Petra.
Yeah.
And it's DI Courthouse.
Yeah.
So the land guys love DI Courthouse, and you will tear it from their cold dead hands.
Mm-hmm.
And the geologists love Petra and Kingdom, and you will tear those from their cold dead hands.
Well, yeah, because when we look at it too, but like, I mean, Kingdom, they have that direct connect to the data, and it's like, otherwise it's a lot of effort if you were going to take Inveris or Well Database or anyone and like
there's ways to do it.
There's ways to do it, but I mean, it's not.
How much is it worth to you?
Yeah.
Right. How much is S&P charging you, and is it worth it to you to try to do an end run around them?
What's fun that we keep running into it at work is people still don't understand that API 14 is not a standard. So like, oh, why can't I just marry my IHS and DI data? And like yesterday, I pumped out a good enough, because we're not doing a basin-wide well header right now. We're not doing a well master. But if you want this, like, I'll do it kind of the way you want. And I was like, this is okay. This is going to be good enough for what you need it for. But it's going back to the MDM, like people think it's it's the same data, right?
Kind of.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that to me is one of the biggest misconceptions that I feel like tech people coming into the energy space that don't have much or any exposure into the energy space don't understand, is that we have a shitload of data, but we've been doing it for the last 30 plus years, 40 years now, as it happens.
And it comes in a million different formats.
Right. Well, and one of the other crazy things that a lot of people just don't truly understand is that all of these, your customer generates next to none of their own data. Like the operators don't generate much data themselves. It's
service companies.
Literally all from pretty much every, like you've got your production SCADA data, but everything up to that point came from pretty much somebody else. Right. And so like, that's a huge problem when you're like, oh yeah, well, because you just don't think about things, right? Like if you're Google and, you're having people fill out a form, you control everything about the data input both on the front end and the
Mhm.
back end. In oil and gas, you don't control any of the front end stuff, and you hope that they can deliver it in a way that you want it to. I know y'all are seeing that more and more in contracts and stuff, but it's without good data structure or standards, like
Yeah.
it's a nightmare.
I think IBM tries to claim proprietary ownership of this, but there's this framework of the 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety.
Mhm.
Except for a couple of data sets, we do not have volume problems.
Yeah.
No.
Except for a couple of data sets, we do not have velocity problems.
Yep.
We have variety problems,
Yep.
110%.
Yeah.
And so wrestling that kind of thing ends up being, I mean, that's been most of my career, is a zillion VLOOKUPs and spreadsheets
Yeah.
trying to figure out, like,
What's the right relationship?
if I'm doing
between-
acquisition and divestiture work, it's always in spreadsheets,
Yeah.
right? Like that's
Well, even like
the nature of it.
I know we've had a number of discussions on the whiskey data nights about like just well ID, like what is how do you uniquely identify your wells and at what level, right?
And most companies use prop num
Yeah.
from Aries
Yeah.
for good reasons.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, that's the thing. Like you don't have to create your own standard. Just pick one and stick
one.
with it.
well,
right?
yeah,
Like,
the
could be
REs,
cost center,
the
it
REs
could-
are already
whatever
tech
it
creates the first well master in your company anyway. So they're pulling in the spud date and they're
Mhm.
pulling it like, I mean, and they're just keeping it up ad hoc, but like,
Yep.
then
I have
you-
a couple of clients that I would like to introduce you to and have you persuade them of that.
Yeah.
Because it works really well.
Yeah.
Right. It's the cheapest MDM you could possibly do.
Yeah.
Is just to treat the reserve system as the master well list and tell everybody else either you need to match to what
right.
is in the reserve system, or you need to convince the reserves engineer that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Which is usually hard.
Yeah.
But like that approach of just choosing a system and saying, this is the source of truth. You either match to them or you convince them that they're wrong.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of things simpler.
Yeah.
And then I want to make sure that all the service companies are also listening to this. As someone who has worked at a service company most of my career, when Bobby and I were working together, when we were building out our data platform and stuff, I was one of the system that we were using internally was kind of like a low code, no code,
yeah, QuickBase,
very
like what
flexible.
Jeff's
Yeah, we can
using.
use QuickBase. But we had a wells table. And so for every job, there's obviously a well that we would go out to, but it was just a text field. And I'm like, there is no way that we can keep doing this just off of whoever is setting up the well, typing in whatever they believe the well name is, or whatever the
Yeah.
consultant on the phone told them the well name is. And so I got us to integrate via an API through a data provider. So they would put in the state and county, and then they'd start typing the well name, and it would auto
Pick list,
search,
baby.
pick list,
Ooh.
and then it pull in all the header information, the lat
Give
long,
them
the
lat
API
long.
So
numbers.
tasty.
It give you all this stuff, right? And a standard naming convention. And it's like,
Yeah.
this makes everything so much easier,
Yeah.
just like out of the gate.
Well, and can we all agree that hashtags are for Twitter, not for well names?
Yes.
Is that I think the Save the Strippers bumper stickers.
Mhm.
I think I gotta
Yeah.
make bumper stickers that say hashtags are for Twitter, not for well names, and drive around Midland and see
Oh,
if
yeah.
anybody laughs.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Brian
Yeah,
McDowell.
there you
Yeah.
go.
Gotta get a new one at tour.
Yeah, you've
But-
seen some wear.
No, I wholeheartily agree. But
Yeah, I think that stuff is fascinating. Like the size of the oil and gas software market, it's not small.
No.
It is not small, and I don't think that enough E&P companies really understand what their options are.
Yeah.
I don't think they understand the perspective of the software vendors. Like, man, ARR is everything.
Yep.
In
Yeah.
the software business. And as a reservoir engineer, I never cared about that. There is no such thing as ARR when you constantly have a declining
Yeah.
asset base.
No, I
Like,
gotta do more. I gotta do another.
that whole concept was new to me. So annually recurring revenue for the folks in the back, like that is the metric that matters. And if you're asking a software company to do something that isn't going to help their ARR, why should they say yes?
Yeah.
Those
re-
are
But I can look at Aries and some of these companies that haven't really had to change like ever, or inertia, or it's like that's
printing money.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's the easiest job. If you want to hook someone up, get them a account rep deal.
I tell you who you guys need to get on the podcast is Dave Wysocki,
Okay.
product manager for Aries.
Yeah.
He's a super smart guy.
I would love that.
It was their customer success before people called it customer success. He was their customer success manager
Okay.
for a long time. And last I heard, he was the product manager over there. And like is there another piece of software that has been trash talked on Digital Wildcatters podcast more than
Aries?
And yet it's still number one
Ubiquitous,
by market
yeah.
share,
Yeah.
far and away.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny too, because you can see, I mean, even down to the ops level with things like the EDR from Payson and those guys from the early days, right? Like if you can establish first mover, like the first mover advantage in the oil field is a big.
I mean, like Common
thing.
Curve is up against it because the banks use Aries. Like, so
Mhm.
even if you do all your crap in Common Curve, it's still got to go out to an Aries database that someone can, like.
Although I think they've dealt with that pretty well,
Yeah,
though,
that's the
because
thing.
you can share if you've
You
got
can
a Common Curve
import and
database,
export.
you can give somebody else the ability to log in, or at
Okay.
least you could
Yeah.
as of a couple of years ago. And so if I'm a bank engineer, I could receive a database, run my price sensitivity, tweak a couple of decline curves,
Yeah.
get my summaries and one lines to do my engineering underwriting. And I don't actually need to pay for a license. So there's some things there.
Yeah,
Again,
I mean-
getting back to like commercial models, how do you make it so that barrier goes away?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
And you're not going to change that overnight,
no.
either. But
But like PhD Win back in the 90s, the way that they got market share was they literally sent free trial CD-ROMs
AOL
to
model.
it was the AOL model. They sent free trial CD-ROMs to E&P companies. The story I heard is they literally put reservoir engineer as the person it was going to when they
Okay.
didn't even know who it was.
Yeah.
And just
Incredible.
freaking put them in the mail. And people stuck it in their computer and played around with it. It's like, oh yeah, this is pretty nice. And then 30 days later,
comes the
hey, you want to pay for this?
I'm just envisioning the IT departments like today.
cringe. Like if you
REs are just taking
Well, but
devices out
someone
of
just
the mail
sends
and
you a
plugging
thumb
them in.
drive and here, plug it in.
Like, the equivalent of that today is like comical to think about. Well, that's what you did back then, right? Like,
But their target market wasn't companies that had big, robust IT
Right, that's
departments.
true.
Their target market was mineral owners and
right.
family offices and, two-man operators who,
Yeah.
no, for
why
sure.
not?
I think that's the big thing. Like, because it is so hard to, I mean, whether it's IHS or, some of the big reservoir software companies, once they have that foothold, it's so hard to kind of break the industry from it. I mean, even looking at like Microsoft as a whole, right? But being like Commo Curve, in my opinion, has been so successful because they were users of those products. They knew the problems with them, and they built the new thing to be able to handle that,
Mm-hmm.
and have continued to do so. And so I think that's just a little nugget for everybody out there building software in the oil field. If you're a newcomer to the market, it doesn't have to be, this big grandiose thing. Just make shit easier. Make things integration out of the gate is something that is shockingly unique in our industry still.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
one thing I'm curious about, say in the survey, and again, people need to go read it too, right? But
If
is
you don't have a copy, send me an email. We'll figure it out.
yeah. But how many people are like, say, sole source like Quorum or Peloton? Because Peloton has a pretty full suite. I mean, how many people like say, all right, I'm use Peloton for well view, site view, whatever, land view,
Right.
and like same thing with Quorum now that they buy everything, right? So I mean, like how many people are actually doing that? Because we're like the antithesis of that, I would say.
It rounds to zero.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are very, very few companies that have really gone all in. Most people are taking a more diverse approach. And I think a lot of that is because of the way the companies get built.
Sure.
Right. So like, I bought asset A and
Right.
they had these software packages. I bought asset B and it had those software. And I just kind of
Pick a
picked and
best of breed, or,
chose. Quorum's on-demand platform and what they're trying to do there is, from my perspective, a pretty new concept.
Yeah.
There have been other software providers who could have done that, but they never aligned things to the way that Quorum has.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that. So could you?
So
Elaborate a
Quorum
little bit.
now sells, I think, by my count, like 35 or 40 different pieces of software. They merged with Alcerna because they were both owned by Thoma Bravo. But over the last 6-8 years, they probably made, if you count it all up, probably 20 separate acquisitions. So the on-demand platform is now a series of things that they acquired. So they acquired OGSys, which is now on-demand accounting, Wellies, which is now on-demand operations, Field Insights, which is owned by Fielding, that's now on-demand production, Land Docs is now on-demand land. So that's a really unique thing. I don't know of anybody else who's ever tried that. Peloton kind of got partway there with
Yeah.
WellView and ProdView, and to my knowledge, those were all homegrown, but they never had an accounting solution.
They still don't.
Right.
Yeah, I was
And-
just out with one of their guys who's on the land use side the other day, and he's like, "Yeah, we don't have accounting. Probably
Yeah.
won't." Yeah,
And that's
and it hurts
that's
him
just
on the
a
land
huge
side
gap.
because when he wants to sell the land thing.
You're right. Land and accounting need to be
Yeah.
hand in glove. But
When you say on demand, is it literally I can spin it up and
these are all
use
cloud.
it, or
Yeah,
and
they're
then
paid by
spin
the.
it down?
I assume. I'm pretty sure they're paid by the month.
Okay.
Kind of approaches. Wellies and a lot of other tools in that space have moved towards like dollar per report per day commercial models.
Yeah.
So instead of like it's going to be $100,000 a year, it's $50 per report per day or whatever they're charging. And so it's much more usage oriented.
Feels nicer when you're signing up for it from a.
Or it can be scarier though too, because
That
like
is-
it can get
that's-
out of
What if
hand
we ramp
quick.
up and
Right,
we're going to
right.
spend a ton of money?
Yeah, it's just like the cloud versus on-prem. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is cheap. I can do this. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
make sure you turn it off at
Right.
night, or make sure that you don't auto scale it and leave it on. I mean,
There definitely were a lot of companies, and still are a lot of companies that like they're using Bolo or Excalibur for accounting, and they're using Merrick for production allocation. But P2 never had a daily well lifecycle competitor, right? Or a SCADA competitor. So like when you think about it from the larger tech stack,
you get further out there, it's almost impossible. But I guess I would think full being all in with Peloton would be having like well view, site view, land view, having that whole stack.
and you get all these benefits like a shared well list between those systems, right? Like there's some cool things that would happen there.
Yeah.
If you pushed in all your chips.
Yeah.
So, but I to answer your question, almost no.
That's kind of what I figured, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk more kind of about some of the cool projects that you guys have worked on, or even just kind of your experience doing those projects, and what are some of the interesting, useful things that you've, or kind of unique things that you've seen people do, or implementations that you've done, and what are some things you would recommend people not doing?
Sometimes the most important.
Connect to Bolo.
Yeah.
Don't
3D data models.
You should call. There's a provider that flattens that into SQL tables. So we do a lot of Microsoft work because IT departments like it. So on-prem SQL Server still works great, man. SSIS is a freaking tank. So a lot of projects doing that. More and more, we prefer working on Azure Data Factory. The pricing, the capabilities, all those kinds of things really in and out of Azure SQL is just like, it's so nice.
Yeah.
It's all serverless. It scales up, it scales out. The lowest cost database, I think, is $15 a month. That's stupid.
I think they have a free tier now on Azure SQL. It just came out like.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's up maybe like however many hours in a month. It may be close to that. And it may be like the lowest tier.
Yeah.
But like, I think you can do like basically a free Azure SQL now.
Yeah. So most of our clients and smaller companies, right? We might need like the second tier at like $50 a month during construction. But once we're done with construction, we can often drop them back to $15 a month. That is crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's similar.
You don't have to worry about uptime. You're not.
Yeah, you're not worried about any of that kind of stuff. It's all using your Microsoft
Failover,
authentication. And I mean, you have the same options on AWS and Google, and there are multiple things out there that I think provide pricing competition so that Microsoft can't just like turn the screws on you, because then they'll start losing. But if you're pretty much all in on Microsoft, like that's really effective.
Look at how valuable integrated software becomes when it's done well, right?
If you go back, let's say 20 years ago, and you were at an EMP company saying that you wanted to do a data warehousing project, you were probably talking about $1 million.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back 5 years ago, you're probably talking about $100,000. And now,
it's $15.
Yeah. I mean, you will spend way more time, way more money on people to get it configured properly, but you might spend 20 grand, right? To get it stood up and configured properly compared to the costs in the past. And just crazy.
A much shorter time frame.
Yeah. We did a project recently. Somebody was converting from one production allocation system to another, and they were in the overlap period. So they're running both, and they could see top line that the old system had 1,200 barrels a day and the new system had 1,300, and they couldn't figure out why. And so in 72 hours, we pulled both backend databases, matched up the well list, and built a dashboard that showed them where their deltas were. In 72 hours. Like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
That kind of thing you could probably have done if you had a really, really good team 10 years ago, but the capabilities now are just a lot better. Get the credentials, stand up the database, and you're you're off to the races.
What kind of cool stuff are you doing in Power Apps? Because I think a lot of daily engineers use it probably more than IT departments.
Oh God, that scares the crap out of me.
Or realize. But it's all of that goes back to, one, we're engineers. We like to
tinker
fix shit and solve problems. That's just ingrained in us.
Mm-hmm.
And two, serving the data to the user where they want it.
Mm-hmm.
And as an engineer, if you can't or refuse to serve it to me here, I will find a way to get it there, whether that's exporting CSVs or whatever. I will find a way to solve the problem at the end of the day. So I'm curious, because I think, like I've said before, I use Zapier. I love a lot of these no code, low code type things especially for like just moving data around or moving it from one place to another, or just these little automations for recurring stuff. So
we've done a few projects. My bias is, if there is an enterprise software application that does the thing that you're thinking about building a Power App for, you should probably buy the enterprise software application, right? Like, especially what's that?
They'll maintain it.
They'll maintain it. They'll, there'll be the network effects of one of their other clients has an idea that turns out that it would be useful for you, and it just shows up in the product next month. Like, those things don't happen when you're on a Power App. So I think step one, you got to go to market and figure out whether or not there's a competing thing that could do the thing you want efficiently. Assuming the answer to that is no, we've done some pretty cool little things. Like, you can, we built a Power App to do like task tracking for field operations. So like, hey, there's a leaking flange, or somebody needs to hot oil well number 63. I've got a smartphone app on my phone, Microsoft Authentication, super cheap. And I can poke that in, take a picture, submits it to a database, and rolls through to like a Kanban style task board. There are things like that where you can fill a little gap that's like, okay, maybe there's an enterprise software application out there, but it's $100,000 a year.
Right. When there's so many of those like little manual processes in the oil field that,
I mean, I know.
Like,
well, we talked to you guys about owner relations. Like, I built a little hacky thing. It works for us. It's fine. But like, I mean, y'all were doing something more robust.
Yeah. We've built a Microsoft Dynamics proof of concept around owner relations to be able to deal with incoming calls. There's not a lot of software applications out there. I know of one or two. And so potentially that's a spot where there's a gap and it makes sense. But
put an AI behind it to answer all their questions.
Yeah. I mean, step one is just like, feed that thing a pick list from your ERP.
Right.
So you have the list of owners available to choose from. Like, this is not, pick lists are really useful, right?
Right.
That kind of thing, I think, makes life a lot better.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've been talking.
Yeah. No, it's all good. I'm more like the color guy, you know what I mean? But,
back up and tell people a little bit more, just that may or may not be familiar with Power Apps. I assume most people are, because again, most people are Microsoft shops, but
yeah, the group of people that listen to this podcast are pretty nerdy and also probably on Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
So Microsoft has this notion of the Power Platform that is Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate. Power Apps is a low code, no code application development platform. Power Automate is like cloud PowerShell, kind of like ETL, process automation kinds of things.
It used to be called Microsoft Flow, right?
It did. Yeah. And they still call the individual objects as flows. Yeah. And so
only gripe with Microsoft is they keep changing.
Oh,
they
their naming is
names
terrible.
on everything.
Like Entra ID now?
Yeah. Oh my God. Don't get me started about that. So a lot of times if you're trying to stitch together a solution, you may have a combination of all three of those.
Yeah.
So Power Apps might be the user interface. It drives a Power Automate script that moves some data around. And then you've got a visualization layer that's going to happen in Power BI.
Yep.
So they kind of stitch those together. I'm really interested in that space. I think there's a lot of cool things that can be done. It fits nicely into a typical IT environment.
Right.
There's some things there that are pretty cool. But if there's an enterprise software application on the market, you should look at that first.
You talk to the Dataverse as well. I mean,
we haven't played much with Dataverse, just on the Power Apps projects, but it's basically like an Azure SQL instance on steroids that you just get when you start a Power App.
Yeah.
So that's the storage layer behind all.
Dynamics is kind of part of that too, right?
Dynamics also uses Dataverse as the backend.
Yeah.
It kind of comes with a pre-built data model for like customers and transactions and things like that. And so like if you're using Dynamics for your accounting system, which is one thing I talk about in the software survey, I now know of 2 pretty damn big E&P companies that are using Dynamics for accounting.
One that we just onboarded. I don't know if that's one of the ones are talking about, but
yes.
Yeah. When they said they were using it, I was like, wait, what?
But that is like, I think that's the biggest potential shakeup in the top end of the E&P accounting space in a long time. Because like Dynamics has a very high ceiling for accounting work.
Yeah.
And if they can really prove a track record and start to displace SAP, that is some big news.
Yeah. But it's interesting because like there's different sides of Dynamics too, right? I mean, like we're talking about it as a ERP type thing,
CRM,
but it's a CRM as well. I mean, like there's kind of very.
I have been trying to figure out what y'all were talking about because I was like, I know Dynamics. Why do I know Dynamics? It's because of the CRM piece. I was like, but that can't be what they're talking about.
No, it's the same thing. Well, SAP has the same sort of structure. There's an SAP CRM.
I didn't know that.
Oracle had a CRM in addition to accounting system, because a lot of the infrastructure you would need to have an effective accounting system, you would also need for a good CRM. Right. Complex database, the ability to run batch processing, all that stuff,
all the relationships and stuff. Yeah.
So, and that's kind of like cloud. You don't manage that. I mean, because SAP do a lot of people host their own SAP, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then even just, for us, we've got, our accounting system, it's SaaS, but it's them hosting a SQL server, hosting it all like on their servers, but it's like Dynamics is truly like almost like
there's an old version of Dynamics that's on-prem.
Yeah, I guess kind of like SharePoint used to be as well. But I mean, like now, like you log into Dynamics, you're not worried about infrastructure
it's just a web browser.
Processing power. That's all handled for you, kind of behind the scenes. So.
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting thing that I'm kind of curious to see that,
especially
how that happens.
When you pair that with Power BI and Automate and all of the.
You're on E5 licenses and it's all off to the races. So I don't want to be a determinist about it, but you just look at the market environment for it. It's like, man, that is going to be compelling to a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
But how much customization do you have to do to make it work for, say, oil and gas? Or,
I mean, there's a couple of things like Power BI can't import shape files.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a couple of things like that are limitations that you need to figure out how you're going to manage. There are things you can do, but, there are certainly some things that aren't ready to go for an oil and gas company.
Yeah.
But Microsoft builds that so that all industries can use it.
Yeah.
Right.
No, definitely interesting. We're taking a look at it at the very least, but
and that's again, going back to when my prior company that I was working at was a edge hardware startup. And, I don't know how many months in, I started to realize that the sell for edge was so much harder because none of the operators have costs for cloud, because they get given all these cloud credits so that they will stay with Microsoft normally, or AWS, or both. And so it's one of those things that I'm very curious to see. Like, it's brilliant, obviously, long game, infinite game perspective, but I'm very curious to see once all those credits are up, everyone has to start really paying for all this stuff on each platform, how that's going to kind of shake things up.
Kind of like wind and solar.
In the yeah.
Zing!
Got him.
Well, we're about all energy here.
Edition.
Yeah, energy edition.
Just quit calling it transition, because we're not transitioning at all. But.
No, probably last thing to get into before we kind of hit the lightning round, but you want to hit on something like the trainings and maybe just kind of how that feeds into, sure. It's got to be
So obviously there's some really good Spotfire for oil and gas training offerings out there.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of what like Blue River and Brian McDowell at Sabata do. If you're a Spotfire user and you're not getting training, like, man, you should go do that, because there's probably things in Spotfire that you would benefit from learning how to do.
Absolutely.
Watch the Tibco Analytics Forum was just recently, really cool presentations. Get trained, whatever you're using. When we started trying to implement Power BI at Great Western, I went looking for a Power BI for oil and gas class and could not find one.
Yep.
So we built a curriculum. I'm the instructor for Saga Wisdom, which
nice.
Shout out to those guys.
Absolutely.
I love Mike Wizdecki and John Thompson and that whole crew. So we have the video on demand offering that, and then we do in-person Power BI classes.
Nice.
Again, like Power BI is not the perfect solution, but it makes sense. So it made sense for us to invest the money necessary to build a real curriculum. So we use like an oil and gas general ledger. We use an Aries database. We use the SPE production rates and pressures data set. So actual oil and gas data for the training, which is fun.
One thing I've always thought about, and maybe I'll do it or maybe you're already doing it, but is like to do a Power BI for Spotfire users.
Yeah.
Course where it's like,
that's
I can do over functions, because that is not a trivial thing to do actually in Power.
So I have like a 10-page slide deck that I give a lot talking about that transition. Because like Spotfire expression language is SQL based.
Yeah.
And DAX is Excel based.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some big logical differences between those. But like an actual hour-long course, that sounds kind of, I should do that. That sounds fun.
I would love to, we at DW would love to host that in Collide and wherever else we can.
That'd be fun.
That's
because it's like, all right, I do over functions or I do this thing. How do I map? Yeah.
That was the big, that was the hardest part when I first started using it. Was I was so used to the way that Spotfire's GUI was set up and their interface and where you did these things, that was the biggest learning curve for Power BI. Is it's like, hey, on the back end,
it's just a different place.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything's in a slightly different place.
Like the different ways you do it, right? Like the binning, where it's located, how you do it, and like what they call just the nomenclatures and some of that stuff. And some of the limitations as well too. Right?
As you get a little farther along, like the data modeling in Power BI is totally different from the data modeling in Spotfire. I think it's a lot more powerful. I think it has a higher ceiling, but it doesn't matter whether it's powerful or not. It's just so different that it scrambles people's brains. And then DAX, like the calculate function and filter context.
But I think some of that even comes together because, again, you're supposed to use a star schema. And if you have it in a good star schema, then DAX is much better. But if you're bringing in one big table into Power BI, then it becomes a lot more wonky to try to work with.
I call those Franken tables.
Yeah.
No, that's my biggest gripe with Power BI is that I had to learn 2 languages instead of just the one. And that's the only like negative of it. But
I never write M. I never write M code at all. I read M code.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll edit 1 or 2 things, but I let Power Query write all of my M for me. I'm too lazy for that.
Unless you got to slide a parameter in somewhere or whatever. But
there's those.
But you never have to do that.
But even then, like I'm actually do that more like in Excel because if there's like a little date selector that they want, and then they run the Power Query to filter only on certain dates or whatever. But even then, like you do your clicks to create the code, then just go in and swap out like get date or whatever for point it to that cell in the spreadsheet or whatever. But,
no, it's cool, and I think the big message from my perspective is whatever tool you're using, get some freaking training, right? Like if you're on Tableau, if you're on OGSys, if you're on WellView, like take the time to get training. We as an industry stopped training people on Thanksgiving of 2014 and we have not restarted yet. I'm mid-career, maybe this is my old man rant, but like, come on, we got to get people.
No, that's when I got into the industry and like I saw both sides in like 6 months, like, and I benefited from what you're saying. Like I got in July 2014 and I went to 2 petroleum engineering for non-engineers courses. They sent me to a TIBCO Spotfire training. I got 3 or 4, whether in-house or like sent me out to go get trained. But then, that stopped. And like, that would have been a totally different story if I'd come in 1 year later.
Your worker productivity is completely different.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah. Well, you're spending all the money on these tools. Why aren't you also training the people?
One of the things I like to say to kind of provoke people is, what have you done in the last 12 months to improve your worker productivity? And what are you going to do in the next 12 months to improve your worker productivity? And if the answer to both of those questions is nothing, not going to make it.
Well, I kind of took a nugget from Brian McDowell because for some of his consulting companies, he goes and does like office hours.
Mm-hmm.
So like we actually just started, we did our first one yesterday.
Oh, nice.
But like where our team cuts out an hour and a half every other week and like come ask us questions, like, let us help you or
listen to other people ask questions.
And again, people can listen in because it's a conference room or they can come into the room. But like, again, I help someone with a Power Automate, we were helping someone with their Spotfire, hey, where do I find this data? And I saw people I hadn't ever talked to, like that it was just a different forum for them to ask questions, so.
Well, and
it's cool.
And that's one of the cool parts about a lot of the low code, no code stuff, Power Apps and all of that is that, it allows those non-technical users who understand the business or the subject matter or whatever to be able to come in and have
contribute
better productivity because someone that's removed from it has no idea until they come screaming at Bobby about it and they need it in an hour, you know?
Cool.
And get into the speed round.
Yeah.
I don't want to be late for my flight. Right.
I was going to ask you about the production allocation real quick.
Yes.
Because I know that that's an interesting one. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that no one ever talks about it. And so I'm curious kind of what the survey and your thoughts and experience are on that.
So Merrick is the 800-pound gorilla there. They have the big market share. And then there's just, I think we have like 22 other pieces of software that are in the survey there. Plus, I think another 5 companies have their own in-house built production allocation system. One of the big themes in the survey is the long tail. So there's this handful of applications that have really, really strong market share. Right. And then there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of software that a few people use, a few companies use. And that's very true in production allocation.
Yeah. And if those companies are running lean enough, they just print their own little money.
And as long as they make sure that their current customers are happy enough to pay the maintenance bill last year, it's very difficult to kill old pieces of software.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
They keep working. I mean,
they keep working, right? And so that's definitely the thing going on there. I do think, like ERPs, you mentioned being in the cloud on accounting. That's pretty unusual right now. Yeah. Production allocation is moving to the cloud a lot more quickly. SCADA is moving to the cloud a lot more quickly versus ERPs where there's SOX compliance and some auditability that you need, and things like CI/CD, continuous integration.
Because even like you're saying like that, because I know we've got like 3 or 4 different environments for the, they try something in dev and test, and then they can push it to prod or like
CI/CD and SOX compliance can go together, but it's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work. And so I think accounting will generally be the last to go cloud.
Yeah, we need to do just like a SOC 2 episode.
Yeah,
I would love to have a pro and an anti guest on both sides of that. Just here talking it out. Just because we were so under the gun.
That'd be interesting
on that.
Yeah, I've been talking to Brian Becker from BKV.
I do. Yeah. I had a beverage with him just like 2 weeks ago.
Nice. Yeah. He and I've been chatting a good bit lately, but I told him when he's in town we need to have him on. But he's a cybersecurity guy, so he'd probably be able to speak all about that.
That is so far outside my expertise. I'm interested in it, but I don't understand.
I ended up referring to. I got a buddy I coach softball with, and he's getting into cybersecurity from like being a chiropractor, and he's asking me like. Yeah, he was over it. Yeah, but he's also he's legally deaf, so like he's trying to get in, but he change careers, like find something. But I was like, dude, I know a lot about I don't know anything about the cybersecurity space. Yeah. So I was talking to Brian, and he's like, oh yeah, send him my way, and I guess he's been really helpful. But he's a really good dude.
There's so many different areas of expertise that are required.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's one of those things that I feel like operators are requiring it. Like it's more and more across the board, but I don't feel like a lot of people truly understand.
Well, you have to be compliant if you're public, right? You have to be SOC 2 if you're compliant.
I have no clue.
Yeah.
Usually the accounting auditors will force you.
Yeah. That's that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
Speed round?
Yeah. Let's get into it.
So at the end of the show, we like to just pepper you with random questions, just to
quick answers.
Yeah. And they're going to be all over the place. So the first one I'm going to ask is favorite video or board game.
So Civilization 2 cost me like 3 C's my freshman year of school. So favorite and least favorite, kind of all up in one. I basically had to quit playing video games in order to successfully get my engineering degree.
Understand that.
My GPA did a giant rise over the time there. Civ 2, old school games, Subspace. Anybody ever play Subspace?
No.
That was another one that harmed my GPA.
Okay, yeah.
It was a really early, massive multiplayer online game.
Dude, those MMO
flew around a little plane or a little spaceship and shot people. It was fun.
It's amazing how many of those games there are and how successful so many of them are. It's just
now profitable because of all the in-game purchase stuff.
Oh yeah, the fact that video games have just completely flipped their models now, where it's like the game's free. Every cool thing you want in it, you're going to pay for it. But I'm cool with that because I'm cheap and I don't need all the cool fancy. I don't need the Spider-Man skin, I don't care. I just want to play on Call of Duty and have some 12-year-olds
trash talk me.
Yeah,
that's good.
Is there a new piece of software in oil and gas you're excited about?
New piece of software. I mean, I am genuinely excited about a lot of the new cloud native software startups that are doing rapid development.
Yeah.
You know, moving really fast. And I try not to name names.
Fair.
And pick favorites because
That's right.
but just the number of entrepreneurs that are in the space right now trying to do something cool.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in like the history of energy tech, and a similar thing happened in the late 80s. So a bunch of people that got laid off in 84, 85, 86 went off and started software companies that are like the technology bedrock of the industry today.
People are using now,
You know, all these really, really important tools that got released in the late 80s and early 90s. That's been happening since 2014 for us as an industry. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
It's a little overwhelming because there's so damn many things available to buy.
Yeah. Because you're helping people kind of triangulate,
right? But it's exciting. And if nothing else, just to put pressure on the old incumbents is a huge benefit for the industry.
Yeah, at least put some pressure. I mean, they don't have a monopoly, essentially. Like,
yeah. No, I think that's been one of the big things historically, right? Is it's like for so long there was just monopolies across all these big software platforms that like there were no incumbents.
Yeah, I wish I had a version of my software survey from 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And to see how different it's changed.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Let's go with either favorite or most interesting, exciting open source, either software and or Git repo or library.
Man, I just don't work in open source. I think this is true of a lot of like E&P engineers. I always worked for a company that bought expensive software. You know, SaaS used to cost an absolute fortune. And we had like 100 licenses at Exxon.
Yep.
I poked around in R, I've poked around in Python, but it's just never been a big part of my career.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about it. You know, I did the usual thing in college of like playing around with Linux and stuff like that, but it just I never got deep into it. When what I really wanted to do was like be a useful reservoir engineer. And in order to do that in my career, I used
the tools that were given to you,
tools that my company paid for me to use.
Yeah.
I don't even have anything.
Power apps.
Certainly not open source.
Yeah.
It's those low code, no code tools kind of, I feel like fall into that pseudo open source realm almost.
Is Notepad++ open source?
Yeah, I think so. We call that.
So.
That is a good piece of software. Yeah.
That is a
little bit of
tool
everything.
of
Scratchpad,
class,
SQL editor,
taste.
whatever.
Yeah. Those are, we need to open 1 second frac data.
Yeah.
Notepad++.
That's exactly
baby.
why I know what that is. That's literally why I had to download it, because I could not find anything to open those files.
But it's got all those filters now where you can put on
great.
the color coding for different languages and stuff. Like it's really nice.
Yeah, like an IntelliSense kind of thing, or the smart highlighting. But
just they added all these little GUI features, right? Like, is it comma separated or tab separate? Like, you just click the button and it reformats everything.
If your IT department does not let you use Notepad++, then complain, because it's really great.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm like I got local admin, so I'm good. No complaints about my IT, but
I am the IT.
Yeah. Who's your favorite social media follow?
Gosh, social media follow. So I'm a massive Twitter lurker.
Okay.
I do not post. In fact, my tag is longtime lurker.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
I really loved not Ken Lay, but the other Jeff Skilling.
Oh God, yeah.
The Mr. and Mrs. Skilling stuff was just fantastic.
Yeah.
I miss.
That was 2017,
There was that window
2018,
of time.
like when
It
that
was
EFT
magic.
really started
Before
taking off,
COVID.
and like
Yep.
Oh, it was
like
magic.
the Phantom, like
There were so many.
there were just some really good, and then we had one of them on actually early episodes.
And it's like watching
ONGOG,
it's like watching a car crash when you can see somebody kind of like fall apart online. This is part of why I lurk, is because I'm worried that someday I might.
Yeah, you'll be the.
I'll be the one that people are sending me screenshots of. Can you believe what this guy posted? But it's a spectator sport for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about either favorite or just most like impactful, interesting kind of books that you've, whether it be tech, energy, or otherwise?
Yeah, I know you guys love Crossing the Chasm. Everybody loves that. I did a book that's out of print now that I'm a huge fan of. It's called The Data Asset. A guy named Tony Fisher wrote it for the SAS Institute.
Okay.
Like in the 90s or something. And it's one of those books where you just need to read like the first 2 chapters, but he really talks about how, like, if you're going to treat data as an asset, you better figure out how you're going to get a return on that asset. There's 3 ways. You increase revenue, you decrease expenses, or you reduce risk. Those are the only 3 ways. Yeah. And if you can't tie a technology project to a financial statement outcome that does one of those 3 things, why are you doing it? Yeah. And maybe you should stop. And I first read that book probably 5-6 years ago, and it really kind of turned on my head like, oh, wait. I'm in love with this idea because I think it's cool, but I can't tie it to a financial statement. And so
it's fun to play with. It's a cool technology,
right.
But does this move the needle?
Right.
I mean, that's great advice too for all the software folks.
100%.
Right. Like,
right.
Well, because that's exactly how pretty much it took me forever to realize that every operator, the first thing they think about when they make a decision is risk. Like, because the risks are so great in the oil field, right? Like, especially down at the operation level. And so once you like understand that and you realize that, hey, it can't just be this 1-2% incremental thing for them to completely rip and replace from whatever they're currently using. It has to be a very substantial, also very clearly defined and understood value prop. And then you can start getting people's attention, right?
When you're selling a commodity, you usually don't have that much control over your revenue. Mm-hmm. So I think most of the time, E&P companies need to be focused on reduce expenses or reduce risk. Yep. Those are the 2 things that you can really get a job done on. So that I highly recommend that book. I don't know why, but there are literally hundreds of copies of that book on eBay, even though it's out of print. Like SAS must have given it away as like a gimme at some conference or something. But so you can usually pick one up on eBay. It's worth reading.
Yeah, cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah, me too. That's
all right. Cool. So I know you got a boogie, but where can people find you?
All the places. Longtime lurker on Twitter. No, LinkedIn and our website. So velocity-insight.com. Only one insight. Yeah. And I love talking oil and gas, love talking data. It's kind of how I spend my entire day. So reach out if you want to talk, if you got a question or anything like that. Love to.
Go on the site and get the latest copy of the survey as well.
You have to submit your data. Right. So we give it out to participants for free. So there's a little form that you can fill out. Or we collect most of the data just through interviews, honestly, which is usually more fun. Yeah. Yeah. So
is there like a cutoff for whenever
it's rolling. So we're trying to do it annually. Right. So we're always collecting data and we're always sending out reports. So at any point, if you're interested, just give me a shout.
Awesome.
And we're always looking for places to hold Power BI classes. So if anybody has desire to do one of those, give us a shout. We'd love to come to a city near you.
Yeah.
And teach classes.
If you've got one in Houston and you're looking for a spot, I'll show you the room after this. But
love it. Yeah. Love it.
Appreciate it. I'm gonna go on Twitter and see if longtime lurker username is taken yet or not, because I love that username. Appreciate it, Zach.
Good deal. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.